I want to begin this morning with something of a simple contrast between two events that took place on the same mountain. In today's first reading from the first book of Kings, we are told of one account. God told Elijah to go up on the mountain and there place himself within a cave and to wait for him to pass by. And we were told of great winds that were smashing rocks. There was an earthquake. There was a conflagration of one type or another. And we're told that God was not present in any one of those things, in any of those natural phenomena. But rather, once they had passed, Elisha caught a barely perceptible sound, and in that recognized the presence of God. And veiling his face with his cloak in reverence and awe, he stood at the entrance of the cave as the Lord passed by. We're going to get back to that in one quick moment. Because what I want to do is like rewind several generations back to the same mountain. And with regards to that mountain, God spoke to Moses. This is shortly after the Israelites were delivered from their slavery in Egypt, having passed through the Red Sea. And God told Moses, tell the people to make 3 days preparation, and then tell them to assemble at the base of the mountain, because I want to speak to them. And so they did their 3-day preparation, they all assembled, and what happened? The mountain began to shake. It's belching smoke and fire. There's peals of thunder, flashes of lightning. And the Israelites were absolutely terrified. And they approached Moses afterwards and said, we've made a decision. From now on, you go up the mountain and talk to God, and then you come back and tell us what he said, and then we'll do it. So what's going on? Well, this is what I want to suggest to you. You have to begin first with the Israelites having just been delivered from centuries of slavery. In the scriptures, you make the point of describing how stubborn and obstinate and hardened of heart the Israelites were. They were so deeply rooted, in their life as slaves and in the idolatry of Egypt. And you have to do, as it were, something to snap them out of it. And you have to begin somewhere. You have to begin somewhere. And that somewhere was instilling in them servile fear, to overawe them with a display of your divine power, so that they'll listen. Does God enjoy servile fear? Does he take any pleasure in it? No, he does not. But, as I said, sometimes you have to start somewhere. Because the truth be told, you continue your way through the scriptures, and what do you see taking place, in the history of Israel and its relationship with the God who saved them from slavery in Egypt? You see this wonderful process of maturity and intimacy as Israel comes to know and understand God as a father who has nothing but the most tender love for them. It's a beautiful thing. So now let's jump back to our friend Elisha. It's not as though we're going to try to crawl into his head and decide what he was thinking, or what he was feeling. I mean, there he is in a cave, and there's an earthquake. There's a driving wind, rocks are being smashed, fire is erupting all over the place. And perhaps we would all say it would be perfectly understandable if Elisha were afraid. But we're not told anything about his fear. We're not told anything about what he thought. So I'm going to allow my imagination to offer you a suggestion. That Elisha's faith was such. His faith was such that he had no fear of driving wind, smashing rocks, shaking mountains, fire. Precisely because all these things are creatures of God, servants of the divine will. And the God with whom he enjoyed a tremendously intimate friendship knew him as Lord of these things. And as Lord of these things, there is absolutely nothing to fear, but to patiently wait it out. God eventually did reveal his presence, but not, in a terrifying theophany of earthquakes, thunder, and flashes of lightning to get his attention as he did the Israelites, but as one friend speaks to another with the tenderness and the affection of the heart, that barely perceptible whispering sound. Let's take a look at today's gospel and try to understand what it is that's taking place. I'd like to point out a few things to you for your consideration. So the first thing that I want to point out is that Jesus had fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread, and after ministering to the multitudes, as was his custom, wanted to go up onto a mountain to spend the night in communion with his Father. And he placed all of his apostles in a boat and ordered them to cross over to the other side. This is the first point I want you to take into consideration. Jesus Christ put all of his apostles in a boat, ordering them to cross to the other side, knowing full well that there was going to be a storm that could potentially put those apostles in some kind of jeopardy. And doesn't that beg the question, why would Jesus Christ do that? Why would he do that? Well, let's just go and skip to the very end and look at the net result so that we might come to understand the inscrutable wisdom of the divine providence of God. At least in part, why he does some of the things that he does. What is the net result of what took place on the sea that morning? It was exposing them to danger, allowing them to experience terror, produced in them faith. It produced faith. After having witnessed everything that they saw, when Jesus got into the boat with St. Peter, we're told that they did him homage. So I suppose to the best of their ability, as you can in a boat, they prostrated themselves before him and did what? Confessed, truly, you are the Son of God. That is highly suggestive, of a scene that cannot be painted by words and narrated in a gospel. What exactly it was that the apostles witnessed. that so overawed them that they became convinced of the divinity of the man they had been following and calling teacher. They're now confessing him to be Lord, the Son of the living God. Does it now seem worth it? Does it now seem worth it? To orchestrate, as it were, a chain of events to produce a great good. Faith in the hearts of St. Peter and the other apostles. But we go back and let's kind of, retrace, and look at what was taking place. There are the apostles in the boat, and they're caught in a storm. For us living here in Polson, that does not need a whole lot of elaboration, because we know what it's like when there are high wind warnings and what that does to the water on the bay. And the unfortunate souls that maybe get trapped out there, not knowing there's like a little squall. So it's not hard to imagine. But see, there is Jesus Christ right smack in the middle of it. Right smack in the middle. And what's he doing? He's walking on the water and against the wind. Who made the wind? Who made the water? Who so designed that when wind blows against water, waves are produced? Who made the wood that the boat was made out of, that the apostles were sitting in? Who made the apostles? You see, these are all very legitimate questions, and I think the answer is self-evident. And so you see Jesus Christ, appear, in the midst of all this drama. And in response to the terror of his apostles, what does he do? He pronounces his divine name, Ego Eimi, I am. Now you're beginning to see a little more clearly what the disciples were witnessing, to try to even begin to catch a glimmer of the majesty that is being revealed. Is it the Word through whom all things were created? Is making use of his servants, the creatures of wind and water and waves, wood and boats. And in the midst of all that terrifies, he declares himself Lord of these things. I am. Do not be afraid. I think sometimes we do get shaken out of our minds by things that are visible, because we don't really understand or really have the faith to judge them as they ought to be judged. That all things that God has created, everything visible that we can see, is a creature of God and a servant of the divine will. End of story. And that also includes the human heart. Nothing is beyond the reach and scope of the inscrutable wisdom of God's divine providence. And so, what we gather from this is how we ought to respond when we're afflicted by trials and difficulties, and suffering. What is our response? I've never actually seen this happen in real life. You only really see it in the movies, but you watch these movies, and something just awful happens to a person, and they run into a church, and they drop to their knees in front of the sanctuary, and they shake their fist at God. Why are you doing this to me? Do you know what I enjoy about those scenes? Is that these kinds of people are at least closer to the truth than the rest of us. They're at least in contact with some aspect of the truth. And what would that aspect be? That other people and things and circumstances, all the trials and difficulties and sufferings that we can undergo, are permitted and allowed by God. It is He who governs all these things with His inscrutable wisdom. I'm not suggesting that we get angry at God. That's quite futile. There's no point. But at least it's understandable. At least it's understandable, because if you're dealing with somebody who's angry at God because of the life circumstance they find themselves in, at least now you have something to work with, because their eyes are where they belong. On God, who is the cause of all things. And if He doesn't explicitly will, at least permit certain things to take place. Why? What's the end game? What is it that the Lord is shooting for? To produce faith. To produce faith in the people that are afflicted. Far too often we obsess over secondary causes. We want to look for someone to blame, for someone to be at fault. This is a distraction. This is looking at the wind. This is noticing the waves. Put your focus back and your eyes fixed back where they belong. On the God who is the Lord and Master of all these things, including the human hearts of those who are potentially afflicting us. Pray to the one that can actually do something. Who can actually do something. So what I tell individuals, because it's not something that you always, expect to hear. But it's necessary. In our trials and our difficulties and our afflictions and in our sufferings, where we need to begin is to be grateful, to thank God for these things. That's usually the last thing that ever occurs to us. What? So I tell people, I say, okay, just trust me on this one. Just go back to God and thank Him. Tell Him you are grateful for this trial, for this difficulty, for this suffering. You can say, Father Kevin said so. I think he's nuts. But I'm going to do it anyway, because he said to try it and see what happens. But you thank God and you express your gratitude, saying, I know that in your inscrutable wisdom, You are orchestrating these things in such a way as to produce a great good for my benefit. I can't see it, but just like I can't see you, I believe it is there. I choose to trust, I choose to hope. Thank you. And see what happens. Because see what's the Lord trying to do? I would offer perhaps one suggestion that maybe without our realizing it, maybe our faith is operating more from a place of servile fear. Maybe Catholicism are boxes you check off to keep yourself out of hell and minimize the days in purgatory. I don't know. I'm just guessing. But I do know one thing for sure. That if God visits you with some kind of trial or affliction or suffering, He's doing so with the intention of instructing and correcting your heart. He's giving you an invitation to friendship. He's giving you an invitation to friendship. Don't let it pass. Don't let it be in vain. Accept it. And be grateful for it. There's one thing that's certain. It's kind of like one of those maxims, in the spiritual life that you find, among, the mystics of the church. It's like, even if you have even just a little desire to know and love God, know for a fact that He desires you and loves you even more than you can. These invitations sometimes are so imperceptible. They're so imperceptible. We don't often recognize them. But any amount of desire for God, is a hint that His desire, is that there's just no limits. It's just inconceivable to our imagination. How much God desires the intimacy of friendship with us. And we have to ask ourselves, the question: Are we, in a place where we are able to hear and respond to those invitations? But, at the end of the day, this is basically where I'd want to conclude is, having said all of these things, for your consideration, is that the next time you do find yourself in a great difficulty, it's a trial, you're suffering, so on and so forth, is take your eyes off the secondary causes that are only serving to distract you, and find it within the solitude of your own heart, and in that silence to recognize the presence of Jesus Christ who dwells within you, speaking those beautiful words, His divine name: I am. Do not be afraid.